This police department is different from every other one. No, they aren't going after illegal immigrants like those men in black suits. They are looking for corpses. In the beginning of the movie, two policemen named Nick and Roy are chasing after a big fat man. But he's not like most big fat men. It can move quickly and stick to walls. Nick found pieces of gold in his backyard 3 or 4 days ago and put them on top of a tree. On top of that, he lives there with his beautiful wife, Julia, and she sees the orange tree there. Nick changes the subject to how much money they have, but Julia tells him she doesn't need anything material. She wants nothing but her husband. Nick tells his partner Bobby at the police station that he turned in the gold as proof of their big drug bust. Bobby tries to get Nick to go along with their plan by saying that he needs the money for Julia. Nick doesn't want to let her down, so he's determined to do what's right. Nick tells Bobby he won't bring Nick's name into it. Unexpectedly, Bobby says that he will also turn in his gold. He says that Nick is right. Suddenly, another police officer walks up and interrupts them. They told them that they had found the address of another drug gang. They are on their way to another drug bust. Nick jokes to the other officer on the radio that Bobby has something to say to get the team going. Bobby tells everyone not to get shot with a joke from a friend. Bobby, on the other hand, shot Nick during the raid on the drug ring because he couldn't let Nick turn in the gold. He falls to his death after Bobby shoots him, but he hasn't reached the end yet. Nick opened his eyes, and everything around him stopped moving. He looks up and sees a vortex in the sky that pulls him in. Nick then goes to an office, where he meets a woman named Mildred Proctor. Mildred tells him that he missed the judgment, which will send him to hell because he's a bad cop, and they need his skills. Then, she invites Nick to join the Rest in Peace Department, or r.i.p.d. Their job is to find dead people who also miss their day in court and put them where they belong. Nick agrees as soon as he hears that they will take him back to Boston. Mildred knows he's doing it to get back to his old life, but he won't be able to. She just told him that if he does a good job, she will give him a good recommendation. She then tells Nick that they are catching something called Dead OS. As was said, they are dead people who also made bad decisions and are now living with people. But once they smoke pot, they turn into monsters. Inside, Nick wants to know how these people who owe money can still be alive. Mildred says that even though a lot of people die every day, a few get away. Then she tells him to welcome to r.i.p.d. Boston. Mildred then tells Nick about his partner, Roy. Roy was a police officer when he was alive, and he used to date Mildred. Just like Nick, his partner also killed him, so he prefers to work alone now. Mildred tells him that he doesn't have a choice. Nick watches his own funeral as he and the other man return to the world of the living. He then runs to Julia and tries to tell her the truth, but she doesn't know who he is. He is stopped by Bobby and the other police officers in the area. It turns out that the r.i.p.d. officers look and sound very different to the living. It's almost as if the universe itself won't let them tell their living identities who they really are. Nick is a Chinese old man. Why? Roy is a hot blonde woman. On their first mission together, Roy tells her that Deado leave bad things wherever they go. Because of this, it's easy to find them. Everything bad can be linked to a Deado, like dying plants, broken electronics, and negative energy. Then the two asked a man named Stanley some questions. They ask Stanley question after question, until he snaps out of it and says that he looks like a dead person. Deado. Nick is about to put the Deado in handcuffs when it suddenly fights back, rips off its own arm, and runs away. It eats little bits of gold. Nick hits the Deado with his own arm as they chase him. The gold pieces come out of the Deado's mouth. Nick knows that it's the same gold he and Bobby stole before. When Nick moves away, the Deado tries to attack him. Roy shoots it dead, which is lucky. Then, he makes fun of Nick's show. Nick throws Roy in front of a moving bus because he is mad at him. Roy's hat flies through the air. It really makes Roy mad. At the station, Nick talks Roy into looking into the gold more because Stanley the Deado did everything he could to keep it safe. Roy said no at first, but Nick used Roy's pride against him, and in the end, Roy agreed. The next day, Roy takes Nick to see Elliot, another Deado, who is his source. Nick asks Ellie about the gold, but Elliot gives him no information. Nick did figure out that he was lying. They watched Elliot from a distance, and they were surprised to see Bobby hanging out with the dead. Elliot gives Bobby the gold, and then Bobby leaves. Roy finally got interested in Nick's investigation. so he helped him with it and went with Bobby to Nick's house. There they see Bobby digging up Nick's gold. Nick sees how upset Julia is with him, while Roy asks Nick to explain himself. He says he did it to make money. He doesn't know what's in the gold or what it has to do with the dead man and woman who follow Bobby to the airport when he goes to meet a man. Nick and Roy catch the man by surprise and force him to go to a freezer. They ask the man about the gold, but all he says is rude things. Nick tells him he'll hit him hard, but he did it on his own. Then, he changes into a big fat man from the past and brings him back to the present. The two people try to catch the deado. The two are having a hard time, and they keep making mistakes. Nick gets the gold from the deado in the end, but it gets away. Mildred is giving them a hard time at the station for letting a dead body escape and be seen by the public in the middle of the day, so they are brought into the internal matter. They found that the gold was part of something called the Staff of Jericho. With the Staff of Jericho, you can go backwards through the tunnel to the afterlife. If the artifact is used, the dead will fall on the world of the living and end it. Also, the two have been suspended and will have to go to a hearing. Most likely, they will be erased after the hearing. Nick knows that his time is running out, so he goes to Julia to try to tell her the truth again. Even though it seems to work at first, Julia tells him to leave and walks away. Roy sees them, and he tries to talk some sense into Nick by telling him that Julia needs to move on and live without him, and that it's their job to make the world peaceful for the people they left behind. But Nick didn't listen to this very well and said bad things about Roy. Nick realizes he was wrong after some time and tells Roy he's sorry. Then, the two men agree to stop the coming end of the world. Nick thinks Bobby is not only a bagman, but also a deado. But he didn't feel like a deado from him. Roy says that there is a rare object that can hide the bad energy that the deado gives off. Nick then figures out that Bobby always wears the same bracelet and says it was given to him by his grandmother. In the meantime, Bobby meets with another deado to give him a piece of another artifact. From what they say, it sounds like they are almost done with the gold for the Staff of Jericho. Julia calls Bobby the next day to tell him about what Nick told her the night before. This makes Bobby think that Nick is back at the r.i.p.d. as an officer. Nick and Roy show up at Bobby's house right on time, and he quickly hides another piece of gold with them. Nick tells Bobby to take the metal off his bracelet, and the two of them corner him. Then, as soon as Bobby takes the metal out of his body, everything around him starts to rot right away. Nick and Roy put Bobby in jail after taking the gold, but he didn't do anything to fight back. At the train stop, it looks like other officers have caught a lot of deado, including the one Bobby met last night. All of this was planned by Bobby and the other deados. Bobby sets off the artifact when the vault of evidence that holds the gold opens. That makes the r.i.p.d. officer go slower. Then, the deados move to get the gold and get away. Roy shoots the artifact, but it's already too late. The deados have already gone out into the streets, letting the public see them in broad daylight. Bobby gets a phone from the deado, and he calls the big fat deado to tell them that they have all gold. The big fat deado then tells the other deados to start making the Staff of Jericho. As soon as the r.i.p.d. officers step into the world of the living, they are in the middle of a spiritual shootout. But as a man who grew up in the old Western cowboy days, Roy has no trouble beating the deados. Then a vortex appears in the sky, and the two quickly follow Bobby and his friends. But the big fat deado and his ghost block the road to the Commonwealth building, where the artifact is being built. Also, deado has ghosts on wheels that he can use to fight Nick and Roy on the streets. Nick quickly drives away from the deados by using the falling cars from the rotting car park caused by the vortex. He does this to avoid being caught by them. On the other hand, it turns out that Bobby told other deados to bring Julia to him so that he could use her blood as a sacrifice to finish making the Staff of Jericho. He blows himself up in front of Julia, which scared her to death. Back to Nick and Roy. The big fat deado and his gang greet them. Nick drove them away again with his driving skills. At the same time, Nick and Roy arrive at the top of the Commonwealth building just as Bobby is about to offer Julia to the artifact. But unlike other bad guys, Bobby doesn't start by talking about how bad he is. Instead, he just goes ahead and stabs Julia. This makes the two r.i.p.d. officers and the deado fight. As they fight, the artifact starts sucking Julia's blood and starts to work. Then, the dead start to fall from the sky. Roy takes care of the artifact while Nick meets Bobby. When they fight, Bobby has a clear advantage. Roy is having trouble with the artifact, so he makes a bullwhip and pulls a truck down to the artifact with all his strength to destroy it. Nick shoots Bobby in the face with a gun because he is not paying attention. Nick runs quickly to Julia, but she is bleeding a lot. Time stops moving around them, and Julia can finally see Nick for who he really is. Nick tells Julia that she needs to get over what happened and keep living. Nick lets Julia go, telling her that he will always love her. She comes to in a hospital. Nick and Julia are told they'll be fine by a doctor, who turns out to be Mildred in real life. On their way out, Mildred tells them that the Eternal Affair has decided to let Nick off with a warning, but add 53 more years to Roy's sentence. Roy is mad, but when Mildred gives him back his cowboy hat, he feels better. At the end of the movie, Nick starts a new life as a Girl Scout with braces on her head.